To say our colleague Hadley joins us around the set, and very nice to see you here in Davos again.
First appearance for 2020. Very exciting to be here. And freezing,
Any
as
opportunity
usual.
to spend time with you here on the mountain. And we've also got a very special guest for you. Majid Jafar joins us, the CEO of Crescent Petroleum. Nice to see you here too at Davos.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
I want to start a little bit with the broad theme here at Davos, and that's about stakeholder capitalism, this particular focus on the environment. You've been particularly active writing about climate change and also calling on some of the emerging economies to be treated as partners to make some real progress. What do you make of the theme here, and just how much energy CEOs need to throw at this cause to try and get some momentum in 2020?
So it's definitely the dominant theme here this year is about how to tackle climate change, and from a point of view of reporting by companies on ESG, and with maybe too much emphasis on the E, as important it is, the S and the G matter too. And when it comes to climate change, there's been amazing awareness and progress in Western countries, but that's actually not where the emissions and the energy demand growth is coming from. It's 2/3 coming from Asia and 1/3 coming from Africa. And as we saw in Madrid last month, there's a disconnect between the developed world and the developing world, and there needs to be more of an effort to really spend the money where it's going to make the biggest difference.
That's absolutely one of the main focuses of international oil companies such as yours. One of my questions, of course, has to do with some of the guests that we're going to be seeing this week coming out of the World Economic Forum, one of whom we'll get to speak to in just a couple of days from now. Of course, His Excellency, the President of Iraq. I want to get your take as someone who operates in that country. President Trump obviously arriving less than 24 hours from now. A lot of conversation about whether or not U.S. troops should be pulled out of Iraq. How will that, or how could that impact your business, if at all?
So as a group, we've invested over $3 billion in Iraq over the last decade, in energy, infrastructure, ports. I think the Iraqis are trying to avoid, well, it's perhaps a bit late, but they're trying to avoid becoming long-term a battleground between the two sides, between Iran and the United States. The National Security Council of Iraq took a decision to engage with the U.S. on the Status of Forces agreement, but it wasn't setting a deadline or kicking out U.S. troops immediately. And at the same time, Iran is a neighbor and played a key role when they were threatened by ISIS. So they want to achieve the balance, and the Iraqi street is calling for better governance, better services, and non-sectarian politics. And that's the backdrop that's behind it all.
What's the biggest danger there? Is it the lack or loss of U.S. troops and U.S. forces in the country, or is it the fact that already, as a result of these protests, you're seeing certain areas shut down in terms of production? I mean, where is the fear there?
I think it's the latter. You're seeing across the South, certainly, that the demonstrations are losing patience. You're seeing the same in Lebanon as well, that they've called for new government, new system of government that is non-sectarian, that is not corrupt, that actually delivers. They are mostly young, male, almost all unemployed, with very little to lose. And patience is wearing thin. So there's real pressure now to move forward with a new government, new elections. I think that is an important driver of stability. So in a sense, Iraq didn't need this U.S.-Iran conflict, and is very hopeful that things have calmed down now.
We know from reports that Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, has spent many hours on the phone to key leaders in Iraq trying to calm tensions. But if the ultimate scenario were to be a withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq or a lessening of numbers on the ground, what would that mean for your investments across the region? Because there's a fear of instability, not just in Iraq, but across the region. Would that impact some of the investment decisions you're making?
So we are from the region and very committed to the region. And Iraq is a very important place for our investments. It's not dependent on the presence of U.S. troops or otherwise. But of course, stability is vital. Our region is lacking it in many countries at the moment. And it would be very important to increase the scale and scope of investment more widely, but we are certainly committed to Iraq and the wider region.
When we talk about what happens over the next couple of days, we're going to be speaking to several leaders who are part of caretaker governments, if you will, including the president of Iraq. You know, when you see leaders coming out of these kinds of situations, they're coming to the World Economic Forum, they're sitting in some of, they're in front of the great and the good, the big money. What do you expect to hear from the president, and how is that actually going to be applied back home?
So the president actually is not part of the government that resigned. He is still the head of state. He offered his resignation to the parliament when he refused to nominate the prime minister candidate that had come to see him. So in a way, he's the one that is trying to keep the stability. And it's not an easy job because there are all sorts of pressures internally as well as externally. And Iraq, actually almost uniquely in the region, has been able to have good relations with all of its neighbors, plus all the members of the GCC, plus the US, Europe, China, and Russia. And now suddenly it's found itself torn in the middle. So he has an important role to play.
Did the US get it wrong on Soleimani?
So I'm not going to comment on military or political actions. I think Iraqis by and large don't want to see negative foreign interference. They want to see good relations and wide relations, economic and political, but at the same time they don't want to see interference in their own domestic affairs, and they don't want to be used in a tug of war between two sides.
Just very quickly, the IEA has turned the spotlight on some of the national energy providers and has raised some criticism that they're just not embracing the energy transition. These are government-backed companies in the oil and gas sector. What do you make of that criticism from the IEA?
So the national oil companies are actually responsible for a bigger percentage of oil production today than the oil majors. But OPEC has been giving up its share or has lost some of its share down to below 30 million. And the rise has been coming from the likes of Canada and Norway. Now, when it comes to embracing the climate change challenge, we as the industry haven't done a good enough job of explaining how what we do matters and helps. For example, gas replacing coal has had 100 times bigger impact on dropping emissions in the last 5 years than all the electric cars in the world, and will play a key role going forward as a necessary complement to renewables. In the UAE, the plan for 2050 is about 40% renewables and 40% natural gas combined. And actually the IOCs have a bigger percentage when it comes to natural gas, and it's an area that's been growing. Our own production is now 85% natural gas, for example.
Thank you so much for joining us. I think this sums up the conversation we're going to be having, from the environment to some of the geopolitical tensions. Majid, Jafar, the CEO of Crescent Petroleum, appreciate your time here at Davos, live on the set with us. Now, Hadley, it's very much a full week. We've got events unfolding in Libya, but also in Lebanon. And you've got your unique perspective, having just been in Beirut.
Absolutely, yeah. So many things happening over the last several months. I mean, you've got over 3 months of protests. You've got